How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the show. Today we'll be making focaccia. This is a slightly more advanced dough, but with a bit of patience, you'll be able to master it. To make this recipe, we'll have to start with a pre-ferment, also called a Poolish. This is basically a portion of the dough that's been fermented for about 12 to 16 hours ahead of time. So let's start. You'll need flour, water, and yeast. Make sure your water is around 20 degrees Celsius, if your kitchen is around 20 degrees Celsius. If it's warm in your kitchen, then lower the temperature of the water by about 1 to 2 degrees. And if your kitchen is cold, then increase it by 1 to 2 degrees. All we need to do at this point is just to mix everything together. Make sure there's no dry, lumpy bits of flour left over. And then we'll cover it and leave it overnight. The yeast will work its magic, and the next day we can make our bread. When mixing a dough, or pre-ferment in this case, always make sure to scrape down the sides of your bowl. You don't want any crunchy dry bits in your final dough. You'll know when your Poolish is ready when you start seeing it collapse in on itself. There's not much special equipment needed to make focaccia. All you need is a dough scraper and a tray to bake it on. So once our pre-ferment is nice and ripe, we can add the rest of the flour, water, yeast and salt. You'll also need some olive oil, as it is a focaccia. Make sure your water is around 25 degrees Celsius. And once again, if your kitchen is cold, raise it by 1 or 2 degrees, and if it's warm, lower it. Once the yeast is nice and hydrated, we can add it to our Poolish. You can also add your salt at this point, and then we'll give it a good stir to dissolve any large salt crystals, and to incorporate all the ingredients into one single mass. Now don't be afraid to get your hands dirty here. If using sea salt, you really want to feel if the salt flakes have dissolved or not. So I think we're ready now to add the last ingredient. And now once again, using your hand, just stir it around, mix it around until it's all nice and hydrated. This is a high hydration dough, and you'll see what I mean by that. It will look like a sloppy mess at the beginning, and it will take some elbow grease to develop all the gluten in it. In terms of baker's percentage, this is a 73% hydration dough. This means that there's 73% water in relation to the total flour. And I will make a future episode explaining baker's percentage. All you need to know at this point is that this soggy bowl of flour and water will turn into a beautiful bread dough at the end. So once there's no more dry floury bits, get your little dough scraper, scrape down the side of the bowl and tip it all out on your table. And we'll be ready to start working it. Because this dough is very wet, we'll be using a slightly different technique of kneading it, called a stretch and fold. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Make sure you have a little bowl of water handy to wet your hands. This will prevent the dough from sticking to them. You should never ever use any extra flour to prevent the dough sticking, because any extra flour will dry the dough out, thus changing the hydration percentage. On the other hand, a little bit of water won't do it any harm, because some of it will evaporate anyway while you're kneading the dough. So let's start. Watch my hands as I'm doing this. I'm taking the dough from the right side, picking it up, slapping it on the table, stretching it towards myself and folding it over. If you prefer, you can pick it up from the left side, doesn't really matter. The main thing to remember is to stretch and fold, stretch, fold, stretch, fold. Once in a while you want to grab your dough scraper and just collect all those sticky bits. And if your dough is sticking to your hands, just wet them slightly with some water. Well, I'm not gonna lie, this will take a little bit of elbow grease. You'll need to repeat this movement for about 400 times. Now that may sound like a lot of work, but it won't take more than 10 minutes or so. Now if you own a stand mixer, just put all the ingredients in a bowl, attach the dough hook and mix it for about 3 to 4 minutes on medium speed. And you'll see once the dough stops sticking to the side of the bowl, it's more or less ready. But I do suggest learning how to do this by hand. This will give you a greater appreciation for the end product. Right, once you're sick of doing this, I'll show you a little trick how to improve the process. Basically, every 5 minutes or so, just collect your dough into a little bowl and leave it. Literally just leave it for 5 minutes sitting around, do nothing to it. The gluten should develop itself slightly, and this will make your continued efforts a little bit easier. This is kind of a similar process to how no-knead dough is made. You just mix your flour and water and let it sit. And as you can see, I picked up the dough here, and it was nice and elastic. You can really see the difference. We're not totally ready. We probably still need to go for another 100-150 times. But you will feel the dough developing right in your hands. You will not stick to the table or your hands anymore, and it will become a lot smoother and more elastic. And once again, you can collect it all up and let it sit on your table for 5 minutes or so while you go and make yourself coffee or something. Now have a look at this. We started off with a soggy mess, and now it's a beautiful piece of dough. It's smooth, it's elastic, and now it's ready to be proofed. But because it's quite loose, still quite stretchy, we'll perform a series of folds during the proofing period. So once we're at this stage, we can get our bowl, splash a little bit of oil in it. To be honest, I overdid it here a little bit, but that's for dramatic purposes. Don't repeat what I did here. It's too much olive oil. It still came out alright, mind you. So get your dough in the bowl, cover it, and leave it for 20 minutes. So now we're ready to fold. Take a piece of dough and fold it over itself, and go around in a circle until you reach the point where you started. This will incorporate the olive oil in the dough, and this will also create additional layers in the gluten structure, making the dough stronger, meaning that it won't spread out when baking as much. It will rise upwards, not sideways. So after our first fold, we can set our oven to 250 degrees, no fan. And 20 minutes later, we can perform our second fold. It's the same process as the first time, just fold in the edge, into the center, over itself, until you've reached the full circle, and then kind of tuck it underneath itself. I used a little bit too much oil here, so I'm struggling a bit. Well, I'll get there at the end. So 40 minutes in, we're doing our third fold. We can see the dough is puffed up nicely. And almost all the olive oil has been folded in, so we'll give it one last fold and leave it to rest for one last time, and then we're ready to shape. So, shaping our dough. Ideally use a non-stick baking tray and plenty of olive oil. Make sure you coat the whole surface, otherwise your dough might stick a little bit, and you don't want that. And as always, don't be shy, get your hands dirty. Having oily hands will also help you get your dough out of your bowl. So once you're ready, get your dough and lift it out in one confident move. You don't want it sticking anywhere or falling down. Just lift it up, plop it on your tray. Don't handle it too roughly, you don't want to knock out any of the fermentation gases out. Spread it gently using your fingertips. If the dough is quite strong, it might resist a little bit. And if it feels like it's resisting, don't force it, leave it to rest for a few minutes. You can also pick it up and stretch it by the corners a little bit. There's no exact science here. I mean, you don't even have to stretch it out all the way, it's up to you. At the end of the day, it will still look imperfectly perfect. Now once you feel like you're happy with your shaping, and it's nicely stretched out and even in thickness, you can add your toppings of choice. You can go traditional way, you can use tomatoes and rosemary, a little bit of sea salt. You can do roasted onions, even thinly sliced potatoes. It's up to you, but what I would suggest, use pre-roasted vegetables, otherwise they might burn a little bit in the oven. What I have here is courgettes, peppers, onions and garlic. Pretty simple, it's just stuff that I had in the fridge. Spread it out evenly, make sure you don't weigh the dough down too much. You don't want a thick layer of toppings, otherwise the dough will not rise enough, it will not bake properly. Make sure you top it off with a good amount of olive oil once again. And using your fingertips, press your toppings into the dough. Now we're ready for our final proof. Once it's nice and puffed up, I like to dimple it once again with my fingertips, just to press the vegetables in, press the olive oil in once again. This will make the toppings more part of the dough than just topping. And lastly, just before baking, give it a good sprinkling of sea salt. Now just before baking, you want to turn your oven temperature down to 230 degrees Celsius. Now get it in the oven and watch the magic happen. Now ideally you would place your tray on a hot baking stone, but if you don't have that luxury, just make sure that the bottom is baked properly. Lift it up at the corner and check. If it looks a bit soft, flip the bread upside down and continue baking for about 5 more minutes. And this is what you get, the end result. Beautifully baked focaccia, nice and fluffy, with those distinctive large air bubbles inside that we all want to see. Tasty toppings, lots of olive oil and sea salt. And if you have any questions about this, write them down in the comments and I'll answer them. Happy baking, and I'll see you in the next one.